This session was given by a person named Bryn Llewellyn. Bryn Llewellyn owns PL SQL. He is the product manager for PL SQL. He can add things to the language. He can take them away. Who better to give a best practices presentation than this person? I mean, he owns PL SQL to the degree that when 11G was just being developed, he came to me and said, you can have 3 things. You can add 3 things to PL SQL. What would you like them to be? It was like a genie coming to you and offering you 3 wishes. So he knows PL SQL better than anyone. And he's giving a best practices PL SQL talk. And he said, before you can sit in this audience and take my advice, you need to make sure that you match all of the following attributes. And he gave us a list of things that people had to have as qualities prior to taking his best practices. The first one was, you have to have chosen the right parents. You have to have a good background. You have to have natural common sense, coupled with well-developed verbal reasoning skills, meaning you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to have a discussion. You have to be able to debate things intelligently. You have to have the ability to visualize mechanical systems. And what he means by that is you need to be able to close your eyes and imagine what would happen if I did this. Using that index example, what would happen if I accessed 5 million rows in a 5 million row table through an index? Close your eyes. I can watch the pointer go through the index root block to the branch, to the leaf block, to the table, back to the index, back to the table, and so on, 5 million times. Then I can close my eyes and envision what a full scan would do. And then I know which one's going to be more efficient. So you have to be able to sort of hypothesize or visualize what's going to happen when you do something. Requires excellence from self and others, has high standards. So far it sounds like in order to take his best practices, you have to be a pretty good person already. You have to be pretty smart, pretty experienced, lots of things. Has first-class negotiating skills. Sometimes these best practices are going to take longer to implement with than if you didn't use them. I could get you some code this afternoon, but it's not going to be very good, but it might work a little bit. Or if you give me 3 days, I can give you something really good that's going to be bulletproof, that will work very successfully and scale and be very long term. And so sometimes you have to have negotiating skills in order to do that, because a lot of managers would prefer to have a piece of code this afternoon rather than 3 days from now. Has received a first-class education. Goes back to being smart again. And the education doesn't necessarily have to be a formal education at a university. It could just be, I had 5 years. I've been working and I was taught very well where I worked. Can write excellent technical prose, meaning they can write specifications. They can actually put into words on a piece of paper what it is they need to do. When asked Tom, I get so many questions that say, how do I do this? And the question is so vague that no one can possibly answer it. And you go back and you ask a question, and they answer that question, and that leads to 5 more questions, and they answer those 5. And then you get 5 more questions for each of the 5 that they just answered. And eventually you have this much text, and you go back to them and say, that's a pretty complex thing that you asked for. Go back and look at the first thing you wrote. It was so vague, nobody could answer it. Now we have detailed specifications. Now we can actually start to approach that problem. Has access to 1 or several excellent mentors. This one made me think for a minute. If I have really good education, I'm experienced, I can verbalize what I need to do, and I have access to mentors, people who are better than me at what I'm trying to do, my teachers, why would I need your best practices? They would be able to teach me the right way. Well, if you look at this list so far, it sounds like this is the set of people that would not need the best practices. Then he went on to give 2 more qualities people needed to have. And these two really sort of shook it up. The first one was, you know the Oracle database inside and out. And the second one was, you know PL SQL inside and out. Now there was lots of looks of, if I know PL SQL inside and out, and I know Oracle inside and out, and I have access to mentors who know better than I do, and I'm really well educated, and I can think and I can discuss, why do I need your best practices? You just described a set of people who wouldn't need your best practices. The people who think they want best practices are the ones who don't know Oracle inside and out. They don't know PL SQL inside and out. They don't have access to the set of mentors. What they want from a best practices is a checklist of things to always do. Unfortunately, there is no such checklist. As he went through his presentation, it became apparent to me why he had this checklist, because he would say some things. For example, he said, in PL SQL, never, ever, ever rely on public synonyms. Do not call the DBMS output package. Don't call DBMS output.putline in your code. I want you to call sys.dbmsoutput.putline. And I'm sitting in the audience going, nope, I don't agree with you at all. I know Oracle pretty well. I know PL SQL pretty well. I have access to lots of mentors, but I'm disagreeing with his best practice. Until he said, and the reason why, and he went on to describe the reason why. If you rely on a public synonym and some evil developer or DBA comes in and slides in a replacement for that public synonym, they can't replace the sys package, but they might be able to come into your schema and put in their own DBMS output package and intercept your call and do something nefarious with that, something bad with that. It's called a Trojan horse. And in order to prevent that, in order to make sure you're invoking exactly what you think you should be invoking, fully qualified references would make sense, especially in an environment where security was highly desirable, where you needed to know exactly what the code was going to be doing. But the only way to evaluate his best practice, to know when you needed to use it and when you didn't need to use it, would be to have all of these qualities. So unfortunately, the people who are most eager to get best practices are typically the people who shouldn't have them in the first place, because they view them as, this is the way you always do something. And there's never anything in technology that is done exactly one way over and over and over again. It depends on the circumstances. What is the best way? Questions that begin and end with that can drive me nuts. If there was a best way to do something, there would only be one way to do it. There wouldn't be any other way to implement it. If an index was always the best way, we would not even have full scan as a query access path, right? So if there was a universal best way for everything, there would only be one way to do it, and we wouldn't have to ask the question, what is the best way, right? I get this question a lot. If you go search for that on